Trantifa, Live and Let Die, next on One Nation. Hello, America. Welcome to One Nation. I'm your host, Dr. Jake Jacobs. You know, in my last show, I made reference to a number of people telling me, that I need to learn to live and let live. And ironically, if you listen to my last show, I kept on saying live and let's live, live and let's live. And my producer's probably laughing at me like, Jake, learn how to speak. But it's live and let live. And it actually made me think of a movie I saw when I was in high school called Live and Let Die, the great James Bond movie, Live and Let Die. And it makes me think of one of the Beatles, Paul McCartney, and his band Wings, where they sing the song Live and Let Die. Let's just hear a real quick clip to the song Live and Let Die.
You used to say, live and let live. You know you did, you know you did, you know you did. But if this ever-changing world in which we live in makes you give in and cry, say live and let die.
Hear that? Live and let die. So I'm being told by the hardcore leftists, the trans queer radicals, Jake, you need to take a chill pill. You need to live and let live. And yet, as they demand that I live and let live, they are crying out, live and let die. They are radicals, they are activists, and they are hell-bent on destroying any decency or normalcy in our republic under God. Now let me explain how I go from live and let live to live and let's die. Just recently, the he, Will Thomas, you may know him as Leah, proudly wore an Antifa shirt. And on the shirt, it had Antifa Super Soldier. Now, a lot of people are like, hey, just live and let live. Let Will or Leah Thomas, the he, she, wear whatever T-shirt he wants to wear. But there's something profoundly pernicious when it comes to an understanding of why this trans queer radical Will Leah Thomas, the he, she, would wear Antifa. Now, this is interesting because if you go into the origin of Antifa, many of us, we remember Antifa in the summer of 2020 when Black Lives Matter Marxists and Antifa were going all throughout the country, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Chicago, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and they were crying for bloody revolution in the streets. And they were burning down people, attacking police, and they actually were killing people in the United States of America. Well, the origin of Antifa, and I've discussed this in previous programs, goes all the way back to Germany in the early 1930s. The picture I'm showing for my live audience right now shows the hammer and sickle of Stalinist communists who were actually in Germany at the time. In the middle is a picture of the anti-fascist action. They have action spelled in the German letter with a K. Please remember that. So the origin of Antifa is Marxist, Stalinist. These were hardcore radicals who hated the Judeo-Christian worldview. They hated the scriptures. They hated that God had made men and women in his image. They hated the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel. Now, this is important for us to understand. Now, not a few years ago, it was 2019, I was driving by a brand new Chick-fil-A, and I saw a bunch in front of Chick-fil-A. In fact, I just went by this Chick-fil-A today on the way to the studio. There were a bunch of people outside with LGBTQ, XYZ flags and Antifa flags flying. And I said to my wife, hey, honey, I want to drive by these guys and I want to go talk to them. And she says, be cool, be nice, don't get in their face. Well, then when I got there and I saw Antifa flags and they were screaming and hollering and saying how evil Chick-fil-A was. Now, this is interesting. Chick-fil-A actually gave money to Focus on the Family, Salvation Army, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. They were a pro-life organization. They weren't for Planned Parenthood. So the alphabet people, the radicals, and you got to ask yourself something. What are the alphabet people hanging around with the Antifa folk, the radical Marxist folk? Because they're not strange bedfellows. They're actually comrades in a common cause to actually go after our republic under God. And this is something important for us to understand. And there's a reiteration, an increase of this militancy. In fact, there's a new organization called Trantifa Action. So what have they done? They've taken the logo from the original Antifa of Germany of the 1930s, right? And they've mixed it with the transgender flag. So you got the transgender flag, which is the blue representing a boy and the pink representing the girl. And then, of course, the middle representing the transition from boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. Who knows? Trans fluidity is within the midst of this insanity. But here's my point. You see an amalgamation of the alphabet people world with the radical cultural Marxists, militant Marxists going back 100 years in history. Let's look at this next pic here. You're seeing Trantifa tactics, and there's something very interesting. They've got these shields where they're going to go up against the cisgender evil white people, right? They got one sign that says anti-capitalism queer, and they have another one that has LGTBQ, and it's let's gulag the bourgeois. Now, that's interesting because if you understand it, what they're saying is let's put the bourgeois, the middle class, the rich, the affluent, the evil white people, let's put them into gulags. The Soviet Union had thousands of concentration camps, communist China, communist Cuba, North Korea, communist North Korea had gulags all over their countries. These are evil places of death and degradation. And here is this Trantifa tactic saying that's what we're going to do to people who believe in decency, humanity, and normal sexual behavior. Now, this is, I wrote about this, by the way, in my book, Mob Rule, Chapter 1, where I called it Leftism, Antifa, and Black Lives Matter, Unmasking the Radical Leftist at Our Doorsteps. So we ask ourselves the question, what is Trantifa? Well, Andy, no. His parents were from Vietnam. They came over during the latter part of the Vietnam War when they were being persecuted by the communists. They came to America to be free, this oppressive, horrible country, right? Well, Andy, no, he actually was beaten up by Antifa to the point where he almost died. He had severe brain concussion, etc. Well, he's an expert on Antifa and hardcore leftism, Marxism in the country. Listen to what he has to say about Trantifa.
Well, it's the same movement, really. It's just their current manifestation. Antifa can only mobilize, organize, and radicalize in opposition to something for many years. That was Donald Trump. Of course, they were aided by the opposition party as well as those in the liberal press. Now they're going after parents and what they call cis women, cis girls, and by that I mean biological, real women and girls. And the violent movement really, in what I've seen, is that it allows for particularly violent misogynistic men to take out their hatred against women under the guise of trans activism or trans rights. And it allows women who are taking cross-sex hormones and taking on some male typical behaviors for violence to then also partake in that violent criminality.
We'll discuss the militant nature of Trantifa after our break. But, what people don't recognize and understand is that Trantifa has a profoundly militant component to it that goes back to its ancestors, Antifa, and the Stalinists of Germany of the early 1930s. And I think it's important to note, we live in this day and age where people go, well, who wouldn't want to be anti-fascist? But there's a militancy within this group that they actually use the word anti-fascist, just like the original anti-fascists. They said anybody anybody who disagrees with them are fascists. Christians are fascists. Traditionalists are fascists. Roman Catholics are fascists. People who believe are pro-life Christians are fascists. And it's very fashionable for the leftists today to, in essence, say all of their opponents are fascists. There's nothing new under the fascist sun. It's a lie, but nonetheless, it's the language they use. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Chris Elston. He calls himself Billboard Chris. And in essence, he travels around the world with billboards that say children cannot consent to puberty blockers. Well, I want to give you a sense of how he hits an incredible raw nerve of the Trantifa Marxist people who really hate his guts.
People probably want. How do you keep your
What?
How do you keep posure?
Nothing.
Hey! Get your
Okay. They just violently assaulted.
my phone, my card.
And let's hear from one of those officers who allowed that to happen.
Hey, did you just say he came here to incite violence by forcing his opinion on people?
Yeah. Yes.
You think he came here to incite violence because they got offended by his sign?
When you
What
talk
is
to
wrong
someone
with you?
and scream at someone and
He
put
didn't
your
scream
face
at all.
Yes,
he didn't.
did.
They put their face in his face. What is
Yes.
wrong with
Okay.
you?
Okay.
Now, did you see that? And I think it's very interesting. The reason I wanted you to see that part with the Vancouver police is they themselves have become woke. This is permeated through, unfortunately, there's been this peer pressure, even within various police forces, especially in Canada, where in essence they say that gentleman who was simply wearing a sign talking about child abuse when it comes to puberty blockers, and they say he was the aggressor. It's not true. You saw the militant nature of that those Trantifa individuals. Here's just another example of this in London, where they want to go after TERFs. Here goes.
I was going to come here and be really fluffy and be really nice and say, yeah, be really lovely and queer and gay. No, if you see a turf, punch him in the face.
This is my point. Now, look at this. We don't have a couple-hour show. I could show you dozens upon dozens upon dozens of examples of the anger, the militancy of this Trantifa Antifa Marxist group. There is an anger that's growing and growing, and a part of it is because there are many of us who are exposing the darkness, the bizarre, perverted darkness of the trans queer aspect of the alphabet people. Now, I got to go back to Will, the he, she, Will Thomas, Will Leah Thomas. According to Daily Wire's Jack Crane, he says that Leah Thomas, Will Thomas, has two Instagram accounts or two social media accounts. One is at Leah Thomas, and the other one is private, called at Leah Timmis. Now, I bring this up because it's important for us to understand something. The public persona of Will Leah Thomas is one that I'm just an oppressed transgender woman by the cisgender white males like Jake Jacobs and others. And, shame on him for being that way. I'm just a good guy trying to be a woman. Okay? But he also has a private account, and there have been people researching and finding out that he has a really bizarre proclivity towards what's called AGP trans. We have a clip here from his media where he's liked an AGP trans, and it shows, for my live audience, it shows it's a cartoon of a woman, it's a guy dressed as a woman, and of course his junk is erect because he's getting excited looking at himself, pretending or fantasizing about being a woman in the mirror. Well, who is this individual that he was liking? It happens to be Leah's girlfriend, Gwen. We have a picture of the two of them together here after he won an award, and we actually have a picture of the two of them together when she was trying to get money for her GoFundMe account for this is very difficult to keep it straight, for the she to actually castrate himself so he would get rid of his testicles so he could become a completed woman. And by the way, it's interesting to note that Will Thomas supposedly, according to researchers, has done the same thing. He waited till after he won the NCAA title in women's racing at University of Pennsylvania, and when the Olympics said that he couldn't race in the Olympics as a woman. And therefore, he had himself castrated, and he bragged about it on social media. Now, we have another picture of Will Thomas's girlfriend, who's a guy, with all the sex paraphernalia, sadomasochistic paraphernalia in the background. And another one from her account, Gwen's account, where they show, well, I'll tell you, this stuff, it's the HST friends talking about sexuality with his AGP friends. Now, this gets incredibly complicated and perverted, but these things were liked by this Leah Timmis, who's really Leah Thomas. And let me explain this. And this is where the alphabet people discombobulation of nonsensical insanity even becomes more discombobulated and full of sexual perversity. AGB is actually the acronym for autogynephilia. Now, what is autogynephilia? It's a form of sexual response in biological males characterized by sexual arousal over the idea of being or becoming female. To quote the dictionary, it's a psychological condition in which a man derives sexual or even romantic pleasure from fantasy of being female. That's what's shown here in the social media account here. Now, I got to tell you something. Now, I want you to stop and think of this. Here is this guy who ranks like 62nd in the world in men's swimming, and then he pretends to be a woman. And he becomes number one, wins all kinds of awards, robs those women of their positions and their places in the Olympics and other scholarships and awards in the world of women's swimming. But the thing that really gets me is this individual, this Will, pretending to be a woman, who many people now believe actually suffers from a psychological condition called AGB, where a guy gets off, so to speak, on the fantasy of pretending to be a woman. But the problem within this is that there's a strong misogyny. There's strong anti-womanness within this movement. It is really men having power over women. So when that Will Thomas is in the locker room at University of Pennsylvania and he walks in, and these young ladies have been told by the University of Pennsylvania administration, you go along, shut up, live and let live, right? Let's just let this be right now because that's a politically correct world. When that was happening, he was in the girls' locker room naked with his penis and his testicles, and these young ladies were traumatized. Their privacy, their safe spaces were violated. Title IX has been flipped on its head by these hardcore leftists, and Will Thomas has been laughing the whole time in his perverse worldview. Now, I want you to understand something, people. This goes back to Sigmund Freud's polymorphous perversity, where in essence he said that normal sexuality as taught within the Judeo-Christian worldview must be destroyed and eradicated by an expression of polymorphous perversity of various kinds. Herbert Marcuse talked about this in many of his writings back in the 1960s and 70s. These are cultural Marxists who are hell-bent on destroying our American Judeo-Christian civilization. I want you to listen to the words of Helen Joyce talking about this movement, which is very profoundly spot on. We got her here with Megyn Kelly in her show just a few days ago. Here goes.
This is a movement that is entirely linguistic. I mean, we aren't actually able to change sex. Everyone who has ever thought about anything about human beings knows we're mammals. We know we evolved that way, and mammals can't change sex. You're conceived male or female, and that's what you're going to grow up. You can, a man who castrates himself does not become a woman. A woman who has a neophallus crafted out of her thigh and stitched onto her groin does not become a man. We all know that. So the only meaning that you can give to statements like trans women are women is a linguistic one. It's all about words, that we're changing the definition of words, and that by changing the words, we change the reality. And that's why this is a movement that is so keen on censoring people. Because as far as they're concerned, when you say, as you just did, no, trans women are men, that speech act is creating a reality that they don't like. And so they must silence you to give space for the speech act that they like, which is trans women are women, full stop, no debate. That's it. That's the tweet. And by saying it, they think that creates reality. It's sort of a queer theory thing. It comes very much from universities, this postmodern turn, they call it, in which you think that everything is socially constructed, that everything is about language, that the words that you use can erase all sorts of inconvenient facts about the world, and you end up with the world that you want because it's the world that you're creating with your words.
Now, I just got done reading Helen's book, and she's an atheist. She's not a Christian like I am and many of our watchers, our listeners are. But she understands the pernicious nature of what's going on here within that trans queer world. And did you hear her use the words linguistic? And she talked about all about words and changing reality and stopping speech. This is this Orwellian doublethink, Orwellian speech that's actually perverting the world of normalcy and decency. You know, I've talked in the past about Marxism in the classroom. This is a title from U.S. News from 40 years ago. We've talked about James Lindsay's The Marxification of Education in America. I've talked about the devil in Karl Marx, which really is the origin of much of what's happening in this country. We are at war. Right now what's happening is we're at war with Christian Western civilization. And we need to recognize that very thing because it was Western civilization. If we have a pic of that, by the way, the death of the West, where you see the creation of Adam, Michelangelo's great creation of Adam, where Yahweh is creating men and women. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, these wokeocrats, these hardcore Trantifa queer individuals, these Marxists, these leftists, they're hell-bent on destroying our republic under God. I want to quote you from the book Dictionary of Woke. Dictionary of Woke. George Orwell writes, "But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. And there is no doubt we are now living in a world where reason and rationality no longer prevail, and where words, phrases, and concepts have been weaponized by the cultural left in its campaign to impose its ideological agenda." And then he goes on talking about how in Orwell's book, war is peace and freedom is slavery and ignorance is straight. And I would add, where men are women and women are men. So what's happening here is a war against the word. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, made men and women in his image. The Apostle John tells us in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. And this is what's happening. The wokeocrats, the trans queer radicals, the anarchists, the Marxists, the Trantifa folk, they tell us to live and let live, while they proclaim and take action to live and let die. Let die the reality of God, his creation of men and women. And I'll close with the words of Jesus Christ, who reminds us that all of us need him. "And you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." My fellow Americans, we all need God in our hearts, in our minds, in our lives, in our souls. And we need to recognize the pernicious, nefarious nature of those who would destroy a belief, a faith, in the creator of the universe, the creator of humanity, of men and women made in his image. So until we meet again, may God be with you, God bless you, Godspeed, and happy trails to you.